Thanks for joining us for another season of the Brethren Way podcast. Please enjoy this episode of the Calling series, hosted by Brethren Church Director of Pastoral and Congregational Vitality, Miles Larson.
Welcome, Brethren Way podcast listeners. This is Miles Larson, your host for Season 3, where we are discussing calling and all the different shapes that takes. Today, I am excited to be joined by Reverend Tom Sprouse from Berlin, Pennsylvania, who is now dancing with joy, and with Reverend TJ McLaughlin, who is the Northeastern Regional Resource Coordinator. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about bivocational ministry again. And I want to just start by having Tom, if you could just, as we've done with all of our guests, if you could just kind of introduce yourself beyond what I've said and tell us a little bit about your call to ministry and how you found yourself in this crazy world that you've been living in for the last couple decades.
Wow, you make that sound so easy and simple, and then you throw in there about living in this crazy world. So yeah, that's the issue. Yeah, my name's Tom Sprouse. I live in Berlin, Pennsylvania. I am the lead pastor of the Berlin Brethren Church. I've been here in a capacity as pastor, started out as student pastor in 2006. I've been ordained in the Brethren Church over 28 years. Anyway, my call, I am a United States Army veteran. I was in Desert Storm and in 90 and 91, and was going through a number of things in my own personal life at that time, seeking peace, and had come to a true faith awakening, what I call it. And in that process during Desert Storm, I remember a particular moment after the conflict was over that I had a realization that the Lord had answered my prayer of safety and security upon the men that I commanded. I was an Army captain, had 250 men under my command, and of course I was fearful for their care and protection at the age of 30 when I was a captain. So, but then, the awakening happened, and I remember that day, and it was this internal calling of, I need to share what God has done for me. And that's all it really was for me. I mean, it was a moment that happened. I still think I was very young in my faith at that time, in really understanding, even though I'd grown up in the Brethren Church all my life. And I actually pastor my home church where I grew up in Berlin, Pennsylvania. And then through that process, I just started, I left the United States Army, was seeking what was next, went to seminary at Ashland Theological Seminary to help sort out my call, and away we go. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of my story, and has brought me here to 2023.
I'm TJ McLaughlin. I serve as the Northeast Regional Resource Coordinator. I've actually had my call at my home church, Pleasant View Brethren Church. Started with working with a pastor and sensing God working in my life. When he laid out what the future looked like, I chose another route, ended up in business for myself. God reawakened that call about 10 years later, after I was a little bit more willing to listen and yield, and then started to work with my pastor at the local church, and the call developed from there. Went to seminary. Tom and I were actually classmates. And there's plenty of stories around Ashland about us, so don't believe everything you hear. That was called actually back to my home region for a church plant, and things changed, and then I was called to my home church as Tom, and served there for 14 years. Life had some changes and some things happened, and I ended up in a bivocational position, not by choice, but it's the place that God has led me to, and that's where I serve now.
It's interesting, both of you folks raised in Brethren churches. Were there any individuals that you want to kind of shout out that maybe helped clarify that call, either former saints or maybe still living saints that maybe had a significant role in that call discernment?
I don't know for me if there was, because my faith awakening and my call really came to me outside the church and my life there, because I had, gone on to college and into the Army and everything. I hate to say it, but I was very disillusioned when I was in church and growing up and different things. So I've always said, I hate to say it, but that I really didn't feel like I saw the examples that I needed to, that it woke me up. And that's why I feel so strongly about the call that I have, in helping to clarify what it means to be a disciple of Jesus and how we are to nurture within the church. So, as I look upon my faith story and everything like that, there's different people along the avenue that I can look back now and see in different things. I mean, one, young on and everything, I give credit to Bill and Vera Schultz, John Schultz parents. John was president of Ashland Seminary for a number of years, but they were a good farming couple in the community. And it was a Bible that they had given to me as a youth in the church that I began reading literally from Genesis 1 while I was in the Army through my awakening time. And I just started reading scripture, and it really was scripture that really spoke to me. And so I hold them up, and I've always talked this story that Bill and Vera Schultz, and Bill even visited me as I started pastoring at Berlin and was encouraging and everything too. So, as a saint, there you go. I mean, one that really sticks out at me. There's others, of course, I looked up to. A couple that were, kind of friends of a buddy I grew up with in church, Johnny and Eloise Long. I always considered them my second mother and father in a lot of ways in young years. So, how it is. You look at it and you see people. I mean, I think we often forget that is that the example of the people we see in the body of believers is so important to young people.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
I would say that the two people that played big roles were both pastors. First was Pastor Mike Gleason. He was pastoring when I actually made a decision for Christ when I got married to my late life. Judy was part of the church, and I became part of the church, and that's where I found, my relationship with Christ. And, Michael helped me to start to discern initial callings as I was starting to seek out this new faith journey and where God was leading me. I put that on hiatus for a while to explore my own things. And then when God reawakened that, Reverend Keith Hensley was there, and Keith did a phenomenal job of helping to prepare and get me positioned in a way that I could hear God's call even greater.
I want to echo in there a little more too. I mean, the seminary experience for me was awesome. I mean, the nurturing that went on there and different things like that. I think one of the highlights in the seminary experience is, not so much in the classroom, but outside the classroom and the late relationships you build. I mean, like, TJ and I have been best of friends, all these years. I mean, we're in ministry. We share together and we always touch base. I had a phone call with another fellow pastor yesterday. We're just reaching out. We have different things going on in our churches and just checking on each other and that kind of thing. But, I remember, other people, Dale Stouffer, Jerry Flora, Mary Ellen Druschel, other examples that I had in seminary that helped grow my faith. I mean, on and on. I mean, you look at some of your professors, but they were friends and they were mentors. They helped you shape your own faith. And to me, that's what's so important about calling, is helping to help people shape their own faith.
That's great. Well, so obviously, as TJ introduced himself, you see that he is bivocational. Tom is not. But part of the reason we have Tom here is I've heard him multiple times do just a great job of reminding us as a denomination and other pastors, hey, don't forget about these bivocational people. They're in a little bit of a different situation. And as a guy who's been championing them, wanted to get these two voices together in a room. And I'm going to probably try to stay out of the way as much as I can and let you guys just roll with it. But our initial question is that I think as we look at the nature and the organization of the church around us, much of it is changing. So much of it's changing. It seems like all churches are in transition. Some of them don't know it, but because of the pace at which the world around them is changing, I try to remind churches, no, we're all in transition because we are supposed to be engaging the culture around us in meaningful ways. So does that, when you look at some of those transitions, some of the things that are changing, does the nature of those changes, do you think, necessitate more churches moving to a bivocational model? And if so, is that a good thing, a bad thing, or just a thing?
I think one of the things that concerned me, I resigned from pastoral ministry at Pleasant View back in May of 2011, and that was due to some financial stress that was put on our lives due to my late wife's battle with cancer, and we just needed to do something different financially. But as I looked at the budget every year, I served a church that we're running 2 services and about 100 people, for worship on Sundays. And my salary, which was a living wage, took up 60 to 65% of the budget. And I became very convicted of the fact that, boy, there's a lot of ministry dollars that are not here because of my salary. And at the time, Pleasant View was at a place where there was a good bit of support, and we did well, but it became tougher and tougher for a smaller church to maintain a budget and pay a living wage in the midst of what was changing around us.
Yeah, I hear you, TJ, and that's why my heart goes out, because the one thing I've, in getting ready to talk here today and everything too, that the Lord took me to was Acts chapter 6. When things in the church started to grow and the apostles said, hey, we're getting, whoa, there's way too much stuff for us to be dealing with and different things. And they gave their focus, and their focus was on the ministry of the word and prayer. Okay. And that there was other elements of things that they were calling. And of course, we look at that for the deacons and others in ministry. I think back to the original thing, I think God is reshaping the church. I think we've kind of got it backwards. We continue to use the church to be the vehicle to draw people when the people needs to be the vehicle to build the church. Okay. And here's what I'm saying is, we look back at Jesus' model. Jesus' model was to make disciples. He never said anything about churches. That came later in Paul's ministry in a way of organizing local communities of believers to be able to be together and to care for one another. And I hate to say it, but I spend, as a full-time pastor, I do spend a number of hours a week administering and preparing for 1.5 hours, I call it, on Sunday morning. I call it, the Sunday morning service. And honestly, there's very little ministry in a lot of churches that take place on Sunday morning. The church is to be every moment of every day of the week. And there becomes the battle, okay? So I have a full-time focus. I'm able to do that. I'll have to share a story. Art Gilmer, when I took over as full-time pastor, lead pastor at the Berlin Brethren Church in 2029, we were in the upper convocation at Ashland University for our general conference. And Arden walked up to me just out of the blue, and he said, "Hey, Tom, just wanted to come over and say hi, and congratulations on becoming the lead pastor of Berlin." And he says, "I'm going to give you some unsolicited advice." And I'm going like, "Okay, go ahead." He said, "Tom, you think, eat, and breathe the church 24/7. Your flock does not." And that has stuck with me, as you can tell, in just a comment out of the blue. And God rest, Arden, great man, great saint, for all the years of ministry that he had. Of course, he was pastor of one of the largest churches. Mine's all pretty much similar in size. We have 2 worship services and about 200 to 250 people on a Sunday. And that is the case and everything. So when you look at bi-vocational ministry, we can say it's the reality, but the reality is it good or not? I don't think it's fair to answer that question myself, because if we're to focus on the day-to-day ministry and you have an under shepherd of Jesus trying to make a living and support his family like he's supposed to, there's only so many resources. I mean, the biggest resource of life is time. So how much time do they have to be able to do? So I think part of it is 2 things, because the size of churches dictate that. But I also hope that the expectations of the churches on those under shepherds are clear, that they cannot do certain things, and they can't have expectations on someone in that. And I have to say that because we've had discussions in my own church about expectations. There's a lot of undisclosed expectations that everybody has. Yeah. And when those expectations are met, then there's tension and things. And that's why we're supposed to communicate, but that doesn't always work out. So, I'm not saying that. How does it affect the church body? I mean, in the work of what needs to get done. So it's quite a challenge. So to say that it is what it is. So my heart always has been, what are needs? What are the needs of bivocational pastors? Okay. I guess you could say I'm a vocational pastor. It's interesting that we're using the term vocation.
Vocation.
Okay. Yeah. Vocation, because we're saying like line of work, job, how to receive wealth, to be able to eat and sleep and do those kind of things, when really what we need to be like, and this is where the calling comes in. I mean, when someone is called, I'm telling you, I mean, my calling has grown over the years. I've gained confidence in my calling. And it's been clarified on, and it changes season to season in people's life. So anyway, I'm kind of rambling on here. I see it as a challenge. I see it as a reality, but I don't think we should accept it as the reality. We need to say, what is the calling of that church? And that church needs to understand that if they're going to have an under shepherd of Jesus Christ as leading their church, they've got to make sure expectations are clear and to be able to do that. Okay. It goes back to resourcing, because if you don't resource and give the pastor the time that is needed, then everybody else, really, if you want to understand it, all church members are bi-vocational, because we're all called to be disciples. And yes, we all have to make a living. So, they're bi-vocational as well.
I want to build on what Tom said, because I think one of the things that's happened in my journey is that I've kind of had my mind reset. I was in business before I went to ministry, and I had this huge audience that God would put me at the right place at the right time, and I get to share the gospel. I get to share Jesus, and and when I became a pastor, it felt like those resources, I got boxed in, and I was limited to weddings and funerals for the outside world. And I didn't have that exposure. Well, making the shift out of full-time ministry, I've become aware of the fact that now my audience is much bigger again, and God strategically places me in people's lives who don't know Christ. My heart is, I love being a pastor. I love being a full-time pastor, and tried to make the shift to go back a couple times, but God has closed those doors and left me where I am. And I think it's because of this learning curve, because I've come to see that one of the things that happened to me as a pastor is that I institutionalized the church. I came to understand it as a building and four walls and the organization. And some of my wrestling as a full-time pastor was I had lost that exposure to a lost world. I got placed right back in the middle of it. I'll be the first one to tell you, bi-vocational ministry is tough, especially for those of us who are workaholics. That's as much of a confession as anything. I work way too many hours, and I don't know when to shut the phone off. I don't know when to walk away from it. I will tell you that one of the challenges, I go to bed at night with 100 things that I didn't get done. I wake up to 120 things that absolutely have to be done. And I don't have the wisdom to not chase after all that stuff. So I'm in the middle of a change. I think it's a good change. God's rearranging my expectations. And I think, Tom, you're right. I think God is changing the dynamics of church in America right now. And bivocational ministry is a reality. I'm not sure that, like you said it well, Tom, I'm not sure it should be the expectation, but I think it is a reality, and it's something we have to think differently about.
TJ, I'll just, as a full-time pastor, I will echo your words. I mean, yeah, I feel that same way. I feel boxed in because I live in my community, used to have plenty of businesses and all those kind of things and whatever. And in the changing of the world, and everything. And I'll just say this, we don't have a Walmart in my town. So therefore the world goes to a place that's 9 miles away from my community to live and eat and breathe and, shop and everything. And so, I mean, we are a bedroom community. So I totally agree with you. I keep looking at and trying to gain understanding in the relationships I'm supposed to have. And God shows me the relationships that I have in the church, and I'm to build those as my disciples. Now, John, one of the last things Jesus said in his teaching in the upper room after he washed the disciples' feet in John 13 was that, when he said, "A new command I give to you." So that's like, okay, whoop, flashing neon lights. Love one another. And he said, "By this love, then all others will know that you're my disciples." So it's that love element amongst disciples that is the attractant for people to come to know Christ. That's the evangelism element. So I'm trying to help. I'm working specifically with men, to help disciple them so that they're in their workplaces. And I'm hearing the stories. They're looking at those networks of what they are and what they're into to be able to do that. So yes, no, you're exactly right. As a full-time pastor, I agree with you. And so, trying to how do we, get out there and meet other people and do those kind of things. I look for, new people that come into the church and those kind of things. But you're dead on. I totally agree with you, TJ. Yep. So which leads my question as the full-time pastor, what are the needs of bivocational pastors? See, because I know TJ and I have a great heart within our own region of the Brethren Church of wanting to do, how do we resource? How do we help? But we want to hit the target. We don't want to sit back and say, well, we think this is what you need. And that's the hard part. Even trying to communicate takes time, and to be able to communicate needs. And I think all bivocational pastors, all pastors have different needs. So how do we help meet a need that would help support them in their calling and be specific with it? Like I said, how do we hit that, know the target and hit the target rather than dreaming up things to do? TJ and I started this last year in August. We do a regional event. It's open to all the churches in our area at Camp Peniel in Myersdale, Pennsylvania. It's called The Gathering. We started it and we've done it for 7 years now. And now we've added a component to it where we're doing a bit of a retreat beforehand, Friday night into Saturday morning, because the gathering is a Saturday, Sunday event. But is that helpful? Is that something that can be used for a bivocational pastor? Because I can understand if you've got to work, you've only got so many days of vacation, you got your family to take care of, you may not be able to afford the time. That's fine. But how can I help you where you're at? Do you need resources for education? Do you need a vacation? Do you need money for a vacation? We talk about sabbaticals and everything like that. And I'm quite sure there's a lot of bivocational pastors would go, oh, hallelujah, I'd love to. But they'd probably just like to start out by saying, I'd like to take a vacation and relax a couple days. But so anyway.
Right. No, that's great. And I'm glad you asked that question, because I was asking that question. So I'm just going to be rubber and you guys can be glue. What you guys are the ones, especially in the Northeast, you have a lot of bivocational pastors, and a lot that I think that have maybe come in without a great deal of training. And, some of the folks are doing a really good job, I think, of seeking it out on their own. What does training pastors look like today? Because, the three of us have all been blessed to be able to go through ATS, and I think all have MDivs or something close. That's not the reality anymore. To go spend $50,000 in 3 years, that's a challenge for a lot of folks. Again, especially if they're already in a ministry context and they already have a family and they're already working another job. So yeah, I love that you're asking that question. What are the things that we need to do to be able to help equip our pastors to serve in these churches that are also, in many cases, new to this idea of bivocational ministry? Because like TJ said, oftentimes it's kind of sprung upon you. Now, we do have some churches, and we'll have conversations with some of these folks too, who have by design built their pastoral team around bivocational ministry. That's what they wanted as they were planted. But the 120-year-old churches that we have, that wasn't the plan originally. And so, Tom, you brought this up as well. How do we build into the relationship between the pastor and the congregation clarified expectations that aren't, oh, we have a full-time pastor, but we only pay him part-time? Because generally this person has another full-time job, and it's just not, I don't think it's good stewardship, but we have those churches who are like, okay, we'll pay him for 20 hours and we'll get 40. And to TJ's point, I know I've just put 25 questions on the map at once, but to TJ's point, generally our people want to do the work. We want to serve well, and we want to make sure that we're prepared. We want to make sure that we have a message. We want to make sure that we're doing the discipleship and doing the administrative stuff. And so it's easy for the bivocational pastors to put in 40 hours, and it's very easy for the congregation to expect 40 hours. How do we coach folks through that relationship to make sure that it's respectful and good stewardship on both parts?
I think the conversation comes back to what Tom raised with expectations. I will have to, and I've jokingly said this, that the oil field is a jealous mistress and she doesn't like competition. One of the things that I've had to wrestle through is that there is now another expectation in my life. And to be quite honest, that employer that I have doesn't always necessarily see the necessity of call to ministry and ministry demands, and there's a competition for time. And I think that expectation is a big piece as we think about how we're going to do that, because I don't always have the availability to jump on a call like this, which both of you know. A lot of times we're having conversations as I'm driving across an interstate trying to find another crew on another rig. Or sometimes, I'm limited because of cell phone exposure, those type of things, just because of location. There's just a lot more demands. And I think I've become more aware of the fact that when you're in a full-time ministry position, you have the opportunity and availability to set your schedule. When you're in bivocational ministry and you're working for an employer, unless that employer recognizes that call and recognizes the significance, you're at the mercy of their time schedule. And that's a huge piece. One of the things I always wrestle with now is that time to prepare messages. Since I'm the safety director, it's really not good that I'm reading my Bible as I'm driving down the road. But sometimes, to be quite honest, I've got to pull over and read the passages in a rest area so I can pray and contemplate over them to be able to even get stuff processed for Sunday morning when I'm filling in. So that expectation piece is huge. It really is. I've been blessed with the position that I'm in right now and the management that's around me, but I answer to people who are in Houston who have no clue and don't have any concern in regards to my call to ministry. And that's a big challenge. It really is. I've been blessed with time off, and we probably invest half of vacation time to ministry stuff. But then I've got to balance that because I also have a wife now that I need to pay attention to. And so we try and do ministry / vacation time and try and correlate that together. And it's just, expectations.
And it's in many ways going to be a matter of just clarifying it up front, right? And sometimes that feels heavy-handed. I think for young pastors to come in and say, look, I can give you 20 hours a week. And it's not because I'm being a stickler. It's not because I'm being miserly. It's because I have these other things. I have a wife. I have kids. I have a job that pays me to live. So when possible, I'll give more. But having the sort of the resilience to clarify those expectations is hard. And for a church who is, say, for the last 100 years, had a full-time pastor, reorienting their expectations overnight is a challenge.
I think one of the things that as an awakening here is, I keep looking at and go like, okay, how did Jesus, what were his methods of making disciples? I mean, we got to go back to the Gospels. We got to go back to him and everything. And the interesting thing about it is of course, Jesus did not have a place where he lived. I mean, he moved from place to place. People invited into his home. We know he stayed with Peter predominantly when he was in Capernaum. Then that's where his base of operation was and different things too. So he's living with someone else. But it spoke about the women that would provide and help walk with him. So let me throw something out there that's pretty wild. If you've got a bivocational pastor, who's mowing his yard or her yard? I mean, because if they're doing it, then that's time away from ministry. Okay. And I'm telling you, there's people that go like, how do I serve? And they love cutting grass. Well, guess what? Why don't you just take on a second yard and take, to do that? Not only do you bless, but it frees up time for the pastor. So just go from there. Okay. How do you care for the pastor's family? Okay. Have them over for dinner so that, they're not focused on having to make a meal and do those kind of things or whatever. Okay. I'm throwing out simple things here. You're talking about small churches. How do you do these things? But if you want your just like TJ said, I mean, if you've got, we're brethren. Okay. We came from farmer roots. How did these farmers come out of the field and then, do their work until Henry Huntsinger finally said, hey, wait a minute. We need a paid ministry here and an educated ministry. And I think we need to really take the gloves off because we got to, what's the role? I mean, if we look at Paul's example in Ephesians 4, he talks about the idea of, and he runs through the fivefold ministry. And of course, pastoring is one of them, but it's all for equipping the saints to do the ministry. Okay. Yeah. The first expectation they need to go is like all these things where, the pastor goes and he's there and excuse the phrase, holding the hand. If TJ being he's bivocational and different things like that, if he's got a flock or a congregation, he may not be able to go to a hospital or show up at a home of somebody in that family when they lose someone because he's at work and different things at the time or whatever. So who in the body is there? Okay. I mean, because all together, we're the priesthood of all believers. We're in it all together. And I think this is what's the reshaping of the church going on right now, is getting back to where we are the priesthood of all believers, We have to gain that understanding of we all have a different calling and we're all about. Even pastors have different personalities from different people. And we're not the right, quote unquote, fit to go there. Now, as a full-time pastor, I can go because that's my job, my vocation, okay, to go and be there. So, yeah, we've got to really blow off the doors of expectations things here and really look at it and say, hey, and just like I say, I'm looking at like mowing the yard. That is a huge thing, that could help out a bi-vocational pastor that saved them that responsibility and different things like that. And there's so many more things that can be taken care of. Hey, the car breaks down. Well, my student pastor right now, he's involved of trying to get a sewage system cleaned out and everything. Had to leave church Sunday early because of hey, life happens, but it's time consuming, it's costly and on and on.
Yeah. I've become more convinced that sometimes we have created something that I don't know that God ever intended the church to be. I look at the time, for 14 years that I poured all of my time and energy, the majority of my time and energy was for that hour and a half or 2 hours on Sunday morning. And I recognize now that one of the longings of my heart was to be in the midst of where people were at. I've told you both a story back in January when Houston decided that they were going to change my schedule and I had to make a trip south to Norton, Virginia. It just threw a wrench in all my plans, ended up having a co-rider with me. And, about 15, 20 minutes into the journey, I recognized it wasn't Houston that arranged that trip. It was God. And I had a captive audience for 6.5 hours that I could tell my story and tell about Jesus. And then he had to ride back home with me too. So, but I've become more and more convinced that yes, that's the change that needs to happen, because ministry needs to get back to living life and experiencing God in the midst of living life and help others to find him in the midst of that journey.
Yeah, there's so many elements of what we're putting in play that I think are spot on. And so much of it is just cultural change. It's not even about bivocational. It's just about the nature of the church, right? That there's a priesthood of all believers. We all have a different call, right? Some people are supposed to be eyeballs. Some people are supposed to be ears. And it's, Tom pointed this out, the Ephesians 4 passage. I'm not all of those. I can't see it all. Like I'm all ears and knees and spleen. Well, how am I supposed to help lead people in this other area just because I'm the pastor? And so there is this sort of diversification of these skills and the gifts and the leadership that does sit best in churches where there's, some churches are playing with flattened leadership models. That's very brethren, plurality of elders, different roles for different people, really empowering their people in the pews to do meaningful ministry. And I think that sometimes pastors, if I can indict us a little bit, want to make sure that it's done well and orderly. And so we end up doing a lot more than we should. And as a result, we cut off opportunities for people to really serve in meaningful ways. And we let them organize the bake sale, but not much more. Well, I think that if they have the Holy Spirit with them, leading them, they can probably do visitations. They can probably preach on occasion. They can probably run a small group. They can probably mow my lawn. I think that some of this is pastors not necessarily delegating or leaving opportunity for people to grow. And some of it's the expectations of the church that are, well, I pay you to do this. Why in the world would I have to preach, or why would I lead a small group? And so I think there's even a disconnect in the very kind of the fundamental ways that churches and pastors respond to each other on those I think really important areas of ministry.
I think the greatest time-consuming element of ministry we all deal with is dealing with preferences. Mm-hmm. I don't find myself dealing with deep theological problems and issues and those kind of things, but when there's a problem in the church, it's about a preference. The music was too loud. I don't like singing a hymn. I don't. Hey, you're sitting in my seat. You're, those kind of things. And I hate to say it, in our culture, look at our world right now. The world is on fire. I keep telling the people this. The world is on fire, okay? We don't even have to go talking about U.S. politics or, the world is on fire. Look at Israel, the Middle East, whatever, okay? We've got people going against people, Okay. And we get distracted in all of things. I also find another thing that's going on is it's that scriptural understanding of old wine and new wine. And I'm telling you, it is incredible that old wine does not want to mix with new. I mean, Jesus said it. I mean, and everything, it's got to be a different skin and everything. And it's going like, so like what, every so many years, basically, we should probably start a new group somewhere, whatever, rather than bringing them into the other. But why isn't the other bringing them in? Well, they should be the nurturers. They should be the next generation. The vision of our church comes out of Psalm 71, where it says, Lord, you've taught me so much. Don't let me, now that I'm old and gray, don't let me leave without sharing what I know to the next generation. Okay. We all said it, we're one generation away from extinction, the church is. And like I said, these are the things we get caught up in. And so as we're getting into this thing, bivocational pastors, how can you get help? Well, what do you need? We need to know what needs are. I think you need to share those within your regions and within the to Miles and everything. I'm probably stealing your thunder, Miles. I'm sorry.
No,
but I mean, here I am. I want to help. I want to help. What can we do? Because my church is in a position. We could financially help. I've got time. I'd be willing to whatever. I mean, what we need to know from you what the need is. And each need may be different, in different things. So
I'll tell you something that I miss. I don't have the time to read and study anymore. I really don't. And even if I do, to be quite honest, if I sat still for 10 minutes, I'd probably fall asleep. But I miss that, but it's something to be, and I know it's something that we put in our questionnaire for our surveys for our elders and stuff, but boy, finding the time to be able to actually get plugged into doing those things to feed my soul, that's tough. It really is. Yeah. And as much as I want to be able to have the MOP memorized, I don't. But when I need to go back and find references, once again, it's really not good for me to be reading through a manual when I'm trying to drive down the interstate.
Especially the manual of procedure. That's not
exactly
life-giving.
And not that I really want to sleep.
And not that I really want somebody to read that to me so I can play it, because I probably would fall asleep anyways. But those are important things. Those are things that I need to be able to manage and work through. But boy, there's just not the time in the day, and stress and demands, and makes it really, really tough to get all that stuff managed.
Yeah. Well, and you hit a big one there, TJ. I think it's that whole idea of health. Mind, soul, and body. I mean, for a bivocational pastor, I mean, just like you said, I mean, if you're being honest, and that's true. You'd sit still for 10 minutes and you fall asleep just because you're exhausted, and how can you cannot, I say this all the time, you can't give away what you don't have. And if you don't have it in you to be able to share it and pass it on, you don't have it. So how do we help you be able to get it? I mean, there's a great look at sabbatical planning and different things like that. How do you get yourself to a place where you can take a deep breath? I've always said as a full-time pastor, when we go on vacation, I need 3 days. The first 3 days are just to divest myself of letting everything go and forgetting about everything in the church and whatever. And then I can start enjoying my vacation with my family. It takes me 3 days. And I'm going, then I can finally get comfortable and move on and do things. I can't imagine, bivocational pastor, you need that kind of rest. And that is mental rest. That's emotional rest, to be able to let go, to stay healthy and to be healthy. And well, how many of us are healthy? I mean, we're not gym goers or those kind of things or whatever, but health. I mean, that kind of health. If you don't have a rested, well-fed, you just like I said, educated, time to read, to get better educated. I mean, that's what Henry Huntsinger said. He said, I want to hear something from somebody who's a little more educated than I.
Yeah. Confession time. Was able to get away for October for, at least a week, but at least I had to hide my phones from me. So I didn't plug in. And to be quite honest, Tom, you're right. It took me till midweek before I started to feel even rested. And, I wasn't waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning because my mind's telling me the phone's ringing and there's something on my agenda. That health piece is huge. And sometimes I'm not wise enough to see the warning signs and know the right things to do.
See, and that's the part of calling I think people miss. A called minister cares. And even to take a deep breath. I've been away at times. Saints have passed. I've been on vacation. And I ache in my soul that I'm not there to be able to minister to them. But I'm on vacation, and I should be okay to not be there. But yet, because we're called and we feel they're a part of our flock, we hurt. And so, to have that, I mean, that's part of the health and everything, too, to be able to say it is okay to rest. How many times did Jesus go off and then they went and hunted him down? Where you been? Everybody's looking for you.
Yeah, I think the connection between mind, body, soul, and spirit is much closer than we think. And when we are sick in one of those areas, we tend to be sick in the other areas. And as you all have heard me say countless times, healthy pastors give a church a chance at being healthy. Unhealthy pastors, it's real hard to see how that church gets or stays healthy, just because that's the senior leadership and that's the model that's before them. And so, yes, you've heard me talk about sabbaticals. All of these things, I think, are ways that we can try to pursue some of that. Tom, I deeply appreciate your willingness to just put yourself out there, and both financially and with your own time. Deeply appreciate that. And TJ, I work with you enough to know that you do the same all of the time. I need to figure out how to get all of that out of you without encouraging your workaholism, and I haven't figured that out yet. We need a clone of you to make this happen. But until then, just deep appreciation for both of you, the way you lead, the way you serve from a position of humility and grace. Prayers and blessings on the ministry.
Always available to talk to anybody, to encourage, whatever it might be. If it's, shoot an email, phone call, whatever, brothers and sisters out there, just want you to know, and you don't have to be a pastor. There's a gal I communicate with back and forth from another church in another state. Went to Israel with us whenever we went years ago, and we continue to, there's questions in the conversation. So, I'm here. I know TJ's the same way. We're about building one another up. So we're available.
Yep.
I'm available.
Thanks, fellas.
Blessings.
Blessings.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Brethren Way Calling Series. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe to the Brethren Way podcast so you can catch every episode. If you have any feedback on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Find us on Facebook at The Brethren Church or email us brethren@brethrenchurch.org to share your thoughts and opinions.